Thank you so much for the warm welcome. And don't worry, I wonder sometimes too, how did I learn how to pronounce my 12-letter last name? So it took me 42 years, and sometimes, depending on which country I'm in, I get corrected as well. So welcome. And Vanessa, you and I have talked behind the scenes, and so it's wonderful to be here and share space and community with all of you. And to really round out the day and talk about emotional intelligence and what that looks like, how I view it and define it for myself in my practice with my clients and my students, and also around housing. And so hopefully we can have a fruitful discussion. And I've kind of time today. I'm a talker, and I talk story, which is culturally how I do my game and my gig. And so hold on tight, buckle up, do what you got to do, and we'll get started here in a little bit. I will share my screen in a while. I've got a PowerPoint that will go along with my presentation, and you'll notice that I will jump in and out. And I appreciate the house agreements, community agreements, as I like to call them. If you have questions, please throughout use the chat box, because I do want to help answer those questions, and I've saved room at the end. Before I do get started, though, I think it's important, and I'm sure somebody this morning talked about land acknowledgement, and I think it's important and it's key for me before I begin my session to talk about that as I think about the shoulders in which I've stood on for many years, and my ancestors from the Apache in Arizona and Mexico City. And so I ask for permission, especially in the Duwamish and the Salish tribes here, and in Washington, which is where I live, Seattle, Washington. It's not nighttime, but I decided to use this backdrop tonight. But I ask for permission, and ask all of you for permission in sound mind and body and heart, that the information that I provide to you is taken in as a gift and is sacred, because what I share is my experiences through life. And so, without further ado, let's get into it. All right, here we go. Great. So what's a world without an emotional intelligence? And, as I was thinking about the title for today's talk, I wrestled and I really struggled with, how do I talk about emotional intelligence without talking about it in a way that is appropriate and honors all of you and the hard work that you do in your communities, but also in a way that is very intentional and appropriate, because in my work in particular, it's important that emotional intelligence, is at the forefront, is at the beginning of every session, every conversation and class that I teach. And so I came up with this because if I had to think about how I would live without this, if I had to live without the right side of my brain, the creativity, the imagination, and the fantasy part of how I show up. And sometimes the logic gets us into trouble. And it's kind of a gift and a curse in many ways. When I talk to my young grad students at Seattle University and talk about counseling, I talk about how it's important for us as adults to really think as though we are 5 years old and not get so caught up in our heads. And as we do our work professionally, to really show up in a way that is transparent, sometimes unfiltered. When I think about children and I think about myself, there's this photo my mom has where I decide to take a bath in the bathroom sink, and how unapologetic I was at that moment, because I was owning and taking that space for my own. And so I think it's important that we keep in mind that the emotional intelligence is key and important. But I need to tell you who I am and where I come from. And I spoke a little bit about the Apache side of me, and now you're going to see where I came from. When I think about the identities that are intersected with who becomes Joshua, I have to pay homage, I have to pay appreciation, and love and tribute to my father, Rafael H. Magallanes. The H, the middle initial for Herrera, his mother's maiden name, And so as I look at this gentleman here, and you will see him on your screen, what one would probably assume to be cisgendered male, expressing an individual probably seen by society as somebody male of color who might be aggressive or see him as a threat of some sort. And what's interesting about my father, my dad, is this is the individual actually who actually taught me how to love, who taught me how to give, how to hold one another, how to hold another man. And when I say hold another man, there's this preconceived notion that when we hug, it's odd, it's not culturally appropriate, it is weird, right? He would always hold us tight and pull us in so that we could hug and feel each other's heartbeat. When I think about those moments now, as I'm 42 years old and I see my friends and we hug and we joke and things like that, it's important that I connect and that I embrace that part that he gave to me, a gift, right? The other individual would be my mother, Nancy Jean Buzan Magallanes, the individual who taught me how to fight, the individual who said, don't take no for an answer. At some point, you can find a yes. And as you continue to work through life and as you continue to come against challenges, make sure that you're asking for what it is that you need. Move with intention. I have to talk about my brothers, Ralph, the ranchero, myself, I don't know, I guess the prepster, Gary, who is the forever Major League Baseball hopeful. At 48 years old, he still thinks he can make it. And then there's Mario, our little brother. And I call him our mother hen because he truly is the glue. He's the individual who is level-headed, neutral, and brings us together. And yes, a play off of gender and gender nouns and pronouns, but important because he represents what we all bring. And I represent what they all have taught me in my time here on earth. And I also have to think about these gentlemen. I travel the world with these guys and play baseball nationally, and they are my chosen family. I moved from Arizona in 2004 away from my family to live here in Seattle, Washington, the Pacific Northwest, which is gorgeous and beautiful. And if any of you are here now, we are having a fantastic week full of sun. But these gentlemen also impact me, and they inform me how I move through the world. And I have to sit back and observe and think, wow, how will I interact? How can I be aware of who I am in their space and how I show up? Which leads me to myself. And as I sit on Felix's throne, that golden throne at T-Mobile Stadium now, I staked my ground there. And I love this photo because it's intersected in a way that represents who I am and who I bring to the world. An individual with confidence, right? But also with awareness of self, awareness of those around me, which really, as we get into the weeds of today and really talk about emotional intelligence, right? Emotional intelligence is really us allowing us to manage our own emotions and the emotions of others in our environment, right? And so when we think about that, I mean, we have to really take a step back and think, wow, there's a lot more than just saying, oh, I'm sorry you're going through that situation. That must be difficult, but at least you have a home over your head, or at least you have family members that still appreciate you. And today, as we start talking about emotional intelligence and get into some of the exercises that I brought today to help us understand how we can be more mindful, how we can gain some social awareness, and how we can be mindful of self. And I look forward to that with you all. So the dreamers, the believers of emotional intelligence come up with 5 components. And these 5 components are comprised of this idea of self-awareness, motivation, empathy, social skills, and self-regulation. And what theory says is that if we can have all 5 of these in mind, and trust me, we're all human, and so I think that's important first, but to provide ourselves with some grace and acknowledge that at any given moment, any 5 of these could be lost by us. We might have good self-awareness, but we may not be in a place where we're able to motivate. We can have great motivation and self-awareness, but the empathy place is a really hard area for us to stand in. And so as we move through, I want you to ask yourself some questions and think, where am I on this spectrum? Where am I with regards to self-regulation? Am I good or am I bad at it? Do I even know? What do I hear from people? I went to a training about 6 or 7 years ago now, and they were teaching me this concept around feedback. And I sat there and thought to myself, well, yeah, feedback is something you give to somebody, you critique, you talk about what they have presented or given you, and then you move along your way and you implement it. And they said, Joshua, that's fantastic, but no, actually it's just information. It's information, both positive and negative, and it's up to us to kind of decide whether or not we want to implement or not. When I work with my clients individually, I ask them questions like, have you heard this from other people? Is this a pattern that comes up? Are these comments something that you return or get back in return from maybe supervisors or partners or friends or just strangers, right? And so those are the ones that we've got to pay attention to. So let's get into it. So when I think about self-awareness, right? Self-awareness is really looking at yourself in the mirror. And I love this image because we have to look at self, and that is the hardest thing. I don't have it on gallery, but if I asked, how many of you looked into the mirror today and actually really looked yourself in the eye and said, wow, this is amazing. I'm loving in action what I see. It's a very hard thing to say for many of us. And it's hard because society has told us that that's an area we should not even look at, right? We should move from deficits, right? Instead, right, we move the asset-based models away, the greatness that we bring forward, and we put it off to the side. Many of us may look to the side when we look at the mirror. We may look up as we put on our makeup or comb our hair, but we never look inside, because what we have to do is we have to see the emotions that we're driving with in the morning or the evening or whenever your day begins. And the moods, what mood am I in? Am I ready for the day? And also see how these affect, right, ourself in the moment. This morning I got up and I looked in the mirror and I said, okay, whoa, okay, there's another gray patch of hair. And I smiled and laughed and I kid you not, said, I love you, right? Because that shows me that I'm growing older, I'm aging, and it's wonderful, and it's kind of a fun process. But sometimes I show up and I look at the mirror and I have to tell myself, are you ready for today? Are you really ready to take on the tasks that you're going to be given? You're seeing 7 clients today. Where are you? Are you in a place of good self-care? How did you take care of yourself the night before? Did you do your morning 3-minute meditation today? Are you ready? And when we ask ourselves those simple questions, right, it really stops us in our tracks. One of the things I have to say is that at working on a college campus, one of the things I do, as I used to before the pandemic hit, is as I would walk on campus, I would look each individual in the eye and say, good morning, how are you? Or good afternoon, how are you doing? And people sometimes would look at me like I'm somebody from Mars, not from here. Sometimes when I'm in downtown Seattle, it's the same thing. And my self-awareness is acknowledging that these individuals may not be ready to provide me an answer back. And you know what? With good self-awareness, I know that that's okay. And I don't have to get frustrated, right? Those individuals probably haven't even heard that in a long time. They probably wake up in the morning, and many of my students do, many of my POC students who maybe have had to go to work first, and so didn't get to see mom or dad before they left. and weren't able to be asked or said to, good morning, how are you? And as I let that sit for a little bit, I want you all to reflect on, who was that person this morning? Who told you good morning? Who asked you, how are you? And if it wasn't somebody in your immediate household, if it wasn't somebody that you see first thing in the morning, we might want to ask ourselves, how come, right? We don't want to ask why, because why is a dead-end question. But we want to ask, how come? Or what is it about maybe how I showed up that maybe drove them to not feel as though they could ask me how I'm doing, right? Many times people say, wow, somebody really woke up on the wrong side of the bed, right? That projection, it starts to live inside of us. And the self-regulation really comes in. And I love this. I don't know if any of you watch Family Guy. I think it's comical. I also think it's sometimes very problematic. I think that there are many things that are said on this TV show that are unapologetic and should be said, but I also think sometimes maybe we need to scale back and filter back a little bit and understand, like, what is the real story behind it, and what is the audience, right? Because sometimes our children are watching by accident and etc. And trust me, I'm not a prude by any means, but context is sometimes what has to be given. But self-regulation, right? Meaning do not push the button, right? And most of you noticed I talked louder, I spoke louder, I even came into the screen a little bit more. What this means is it's a time for us to push pause. It's a time for us to think about the traffic light, right? Red, meaning stop. Amber, meaning let's assess what's happening in this moment. Is this a situation that has popped up before? And if it has, how have I taken care of it in the past? Was it a way that worked? Or was it a way that failed? Or maybe didn't have such a great turnout, right? Or outcome. And so what I'd like to do right now is we're gonna go into this exercise. And I want you all to think about a time that was super negative, a time that was just horrible, and you wanted to maybe scream at the cashier. You wanted to cuss out an employee. You wanted to tell an individual how your political views are very different and how they are wrong. And so I want you to think, and I want you to take about 2 minutes, and I just want you to scribe it down on a piece of paper. And what I'd like us to do, and I'm going to guide us through this, is I want us to think as that situation came up and we started to feel maybe triggered, maybe upset, beside ourselves. What was that situation? And so maybe you can all give me a thumbs up in the reactionary area and let me know that you've got your situation, right? Maybe it's anger, right? And when I work with anger, I have to teach people that anger is actually it's a verb, it's a behavior based on hurt and pain, which are the true emotions underneath anger, right? Or is it maybe jealousy? Were you jealous or envious of something or someone? So as soon as everybody has their Yvette, just kind of give me a thumbs up, and then I'll take us to the second part. Awesome. And if this is your first time on Zoom, there are these really awesome, there we go, now I'm starting to see them. You know what's funny is I realized that I could actually change the pigment of my thumb to match my skin color, and I was like, woohoo, Zoom, way to go. And so awesome, I'm seeing those thumbs. So cool. So we all have our situation. So now let's go into amber mode, right? Amber mode is asking us to say out loud, how did we feel? So ask yourself, how did you feel? Were you upset, right? Were you sad? Were you frustrated? Tell me, right? Were we feeling hurt? Or will our feelings about pain? Let's also think about where in our bodies it lives, right? I was sharing today with a good friend of mine, and I said, I have got this interesting headache in the back of my head, and I know it's from the gym, and it's frustrating the heck out of me, right? And that's a part of stress. Somatically, my stress and anxiety has lived in the back of my neck, and so I need to tend to it later. So think about in our body, where does it live? Is it in the top of our chest? If it is, how do we allow that chakra to open up, right? How do we allow our self-regulation to live and acknowledge and feel whatever it is that we're going through? Take a few minutes. Think about how you responded in the past. Again, remember those feelings, remember where it sat. And now today, September 2nd, 2020, let's think of a new way that we could provide feedback, information, advice, or just a comment. I love it. And I appreciate those of you who have your screen open. And I know that there's a lot that is tied to showing face because this is taxing. Our energy is spent. It's Zoom land is for real. And it takes the energy out of us. Trust me, this is wild times. And chronic stress is true and real. And so don't think that I'm making you come out wherever you are, but instead acknowledge if that's what you need to do to save the energy that you have, awesome. And if not, join me. But what we just did is we took you back to that space. And some of you shook your head like, oh, that's what I could have done differently. As I was working with that client, I might have been able to deliver the policy or guidelines that we have in a different way. After we have taken that time, then we hit green. That green light comes on. And because we have paused, we have hit amber, and we have moved back 2 steps, we can then show up differently. Some of you probably use this cognitively, right, with relationships and how you show up to those relationships, right? Pausing. The Gottmans, if anybody is familiar with John and Julie Gottman, they are marriage and family therapists, and they're super amazing, right? They talk about the 5-to-1 rule. 5 good comments, right, for 1 negative. Because if you're going to bring that 25%, and I'm not a mathematician, so don't dot me on math, but if you're going to give me that 1 comment that is just going to tear me apart, you better bring me 5 amazing comments, right? That's what this moment in time is. And so we call this the traffic light. And the traffic light system really checking in with ourselves and acknowledging that, you know, I can probably hit pause for a little bit and I can think about how I might be able to show up. And then when I've got something that is positive, and sometimes in our world, our life, we have to be direct, right? Sometimes policies are just policies. And sometimes the policies and guidelines aren't ours. And so we have to figure out how do we, from the hierarchy, right? How do we relay that information down to the folks that we, excuse me, work with? And so awesome and glad that we were able to do that. And so back to this wonderful caricature. And so don't push, right? Self-regulate, figure out where you're at and how to get to a place where you can hit green. Then we move into motivation. And motivation is tough because right now it's very difficult to find. For some individuals who have been either working from home prior to the pandemic, prior to quarantine, this has now added stress onto individuals, right? This is adding more to their plate because they thought they had it made. They were able to work at home, tap on the computer, be present, and then call it quits and work from wherever. Well, now companies, businesses, etc., have now increased their workload, and they're like, oh, now that everybody's working at home, what do the hours look like? Oh, wait, maybe the hours move until 10 p.m. Motivation also centers around boundaries and healthy boundaries and how we hold them for ourselves. And so as you can see by my quote here, I say, if not now, when? And Tracy Chapman's got an amazing song that she sings. And the song is about, if not now, then when, right? And we have to ask ourselves, if I'm not feeling motivated, today, when will I make that happen? Sometimes for me, it's about checking in with those around me. It's about checking in and making sure that I'm okay, that those around me are okay, and that the decisions that I'm going to choose are going to be healthy for me. And that whatever I decide to implement is going to be for the greater good of me. Notice how it went in. That comment is usually made when we say the greater good of everybody else. And we live in a society where we really think outside. We really want to hold on to the things that are beyond our control. Motivation truly is about looking internally, looking inside, asking ourselves this question, right? When am I ready? Many of my clients, especially those working with dual diagnoses and working through their sobriety, talk about this a lot and talking about what will motivate them. How will they show up for the next day and be ready to do the difficult work? And then they ask that hard question and say, well, if I don't do it now, though, when will I do it? What will that look like? How will it be different than I have lived prior, right? Oftentimes I have these wonderful conversations with my friends and they ask me that question, they check me. So we also need people who are gonna be in our arena, as Brené Brown says, and those that are gonna influence us. And we've got that small group of folks who we pay attention to. Maybe they're not even our best friend, because sometimes our best friends let us go, right? They enable us more than help. And so sometimes we've got to look outside of that individual, and maybe it's our coworker. Maybe it's somebody down the street that knows us well, or that family member who is able to view us from 50 feet above and say, you know what, Joshua, that was a great idea, but let's rethink how you move forward. And then I can put that into practice. Motivation is about self, right? And we've got to have all the key ingredients, the energy, the excitement, the want to change, right? Many times in my profession, we talk about clients need to have the motivation to want to change. And sometimes I think to myself, what the hell does that mean? They have to want to change, right? And what it means is, are they ready to hit green? Are they ready to hit go? And any movement, y'all, is movement. And so even if it's getting out of bed at 8 o'clock versus 9 o'clock, guess what? That's movement. You have done something in the present. If it is working on, I just applied for a job last week, actually, and I had been putting it off, and my sister-in-law was like, Joshua, when are you going to apply for this job? I think it's wonderful, blah, blah, blah. You know, she's like that person I'm talking about who keeps me in line and keeps me in check. And I had to commit and be accountable to her and myself and say, you know what, Martha, I'm going to fill out the application today. And I did. I submitted it on Friday. So we'll see. I'm going to throw that out to the universe. I'm getting some claps. Awesome. But that's how the motivation works. And so we've got to pay attention. We've got to be willing to receive it, right? And that's how relationships work. And when we think about these social skills, many of us say, I can go to a party and I can have the best conversation with anybody. In fact, one of the lines I like to use is, I can go to a party and if the devil were standing in front of me, I'd probably have a conversation with them also. And what's interesting about that is it's not as easy as we think. Because most of the time, we're showing up with a giant mask on. Here's a scenario. I go to my partner's Christmas party or holiday party when he was a principal. And the individual my partner at the time was not out yet. And so, A, I am nervous as heck because there is no hiding my gay and when I show up to the world. Number two, I'm a man of color, and this individual, white individual, right, teaches or was a principal in an area that was predominantly white. So, okay, now I'm feeling super anxious a little bit more, right? I do know, however, that in my back pocket, I've got a few assets. I've got some bomb street skills. I'm educated, and not with my decorated degrees, but I'm educated in people. I'm an observer, right? And I also know that I can show up with some confidence, even if I gotta be like, all right, here we go. You're gonna get nervous and anxious, but you can do this. I have already talked myself in and out probably 6 times of whether or not I'm gonna be able to show up as myself. Well, social skills are very much a part of the emotional intelligence because we've got to be able to connect with the part of us that is emotionally feeling at that time. We have to provide some intellect to our feelings and allow ourselves to say those 6 things that I just said. Here's what I'm up against, and here's what I'm bringing to the table, right? And so it's interesting because these social skills also come from, as I mentioned, being able to observe others. And as we can observe others and be aware of these social cues, it allows us to engage better, right? I'm going to give you all some homework. The next time you're at a park, you're watching TV, maybe you're watching a YouTube video, I'd like you to look at the individual's faces and their expressions on their face. Do they show or present a facial expression that is neutral? Are they stressed? Are they peaceful? Maybe they're disappointed. Maybe they're just darn right upset. As adults, we forget that there are more emotions than happy, joy, frustration, pain. Every book will say anger, but I challenge that. It's a behavior that we can show up in. But we are at the opposite ends of the spectrum, and we forget that there's all these wonderful feelings and emotions, and these facial expressions tell a story. When I show up to class, and now that we're doing it via Zoom, I ask students to just check in because I want to get a pulse. I want to hear how they're doing. I want to acknowledge them and see them and honor them. And what I'm doing in that moment is I am taking in who is coming forward today in that moment. Some of them might be relaxed. Some of them might be tired, right? Because they only have their bedroom to do class in. And so they're waking up and they're sitting in bed, right? But in that moment, I'm gauging how I will have to interact and engage with that individual. Folks tell me all the time, geez, Josh, downtown Seattle is just up in arms. There's so much going on. The transient community is just so out of control, and homelessness is not under control. And I'm so nervous and anxious to be there, and I have to pause and check them and say, how come you're nervous or anxious? What is it that you know that I don't know about these individuals? Are you asking them questions? Are you asking them if they ate today or where they slept? Do you know what's behind the exterior? And those simple questions help us provide a level of empathy. And as Alfred Adler says, empathy really is seeing with the eyes of another person. It's also listening with ears of another person and feeling with the heart, right? Many times I have to reteach my students the difference between listening versus hearing. Now, Adler has this right, because what Adler is saying is that when we are being empathic or empathetic or showing up to the world, right, we are hearing what the individual is saying. I would be a horrible therapist if I wasn't able to do that. And I truly mean that. One of the questions I ask my grad students is, you know, you either are it or you aren't. Learning how to become a therapist is a gift. It's something you're given. If you're a social worker and you're awesome at finding resources and helping clients connect the dots, embrace that, because that is your gift. That is your healing spirit. For me, therapy is what it is. I'm able to give and provide that gift and hear what is really behind the words that they're bringing forward. And as we think about housing and individuals who are looking for housing and behind the scenes. And when we do that, my internet, this is the world of Zoom, is a little unstable. And maybe we're using too much internet, who knows, right? Yay, there's some of my privilege right there. But when we're able to show up in that place and I'm able to hear my clients and hear what they're saying behind their words, it helps me understand a little bit more how I can see the story through their lens, how I can hear what they heard when the individual was telling them a bad story or where they should be. And I can also begin to feel and hear the heart of the other individual and acknowledge that it's probably in pain. And I love this. I hope this shows up appropriately. Technology is definitely not my forte, but Dr. Brené Brown talks about the difference between empathy versus sympathy. And I think this is not only a cute cartoon that illustrates it, but it really helped me and help clients really shed some light and make the light bulb go off. So hopefully this will work. Oops, sorry. You know, I'm gonna try something different. I have it. We're just gonna roll with it, y'all. You know what? We are going to just, oh, I'm bummed. I want to share this with y'all because I think it's great. If you all were over here right now, you'd see me dripping with sweat because I am sweating bullets because I want this to work for you all. Hang in there with me. There we go.
Can you turn it up, Joshua?
And came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. Oh, at least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
Awesome. You know, and I love this because it talks about a few things, right? It talks about privilege, right? Many times when I think about the word ally versus accomplice, right? An accomplice is that person who shows up empathic, right? They're the one that listens. They're the one that asks us usually, what is it that you need? Rather than coming in to fix or save the day, right? It's that martyr syndrome, right? The other thing I love about this is that for us to show up with sympathy, as Brené so wonderfully does in this beautiful cartoon, but really is a choice to show up in a different way, a way that says, I hear what you're saying, but I'm not ready to go there. And they make it about themselves, right? And many times we do want to make it silver lined, as Brené says, right? We want to make the situation better because we unfortunately have not done a lot of the work ourselves in that area, and it's too uncomfortable for us to sit in the discomfort. And I love how the other character really came to the fox and joined. And when I present and talk about ally versus accomplice, that individual came in as an accomplice because they really wanted to see whatever it was through to the end, right? Many of us who are really able to sit in this world of empathy, right, really say something like, I know exactly how you feel. Or, wow, that's tough. That must be very difficult for you. What is it like? Help me understand. And those small questions can really help an individual open up. You know, many times people come to me and say, Joshua, how can I help my family member open up a little bit more? How can I help them get that emotional IQ increased a little bit? Because I know they're hurting, I know what they're going through, and I know that if they just open up to me, that everything will get better. And I wish in a perfect world that's how it worked, and it doesn't. But what does work is when we show up with one another and see each other. Allow ourselves to be able to put ourselves second, right? As a therapist, before I go into each session, I have to tell myself my session current and my client who I'm working with now in the present is not the client before. I have to show up as if I am a new listener, a new healer, seeing a new client every single time, because my experience is going to be different and they're going to provide me with a different experience as well. And that's key and important. When they talk about emotional intelligence, they also talk about these other 4 types, right? Like we sometimes live in them. Oh, I'm amazing. I've got self-awareness. I know how to do this. I can be in this place. I can self-manage, and many folks stay in that and they just self-manage themselves, right? Some of us have great social awareness and are truly able to see and glance and read the room, their classroom, their office, their families. And some can just go into that relationship and, people kid with me all the time. Joshua, whoa, wait a minute. Like, how are you at relationships? You're a therapist. I've heard that you can't have good relationships, and we laugh and joke it off, right? But some folks are just in relationship management, meaning that's where they have to stay. That's all they can do to survive in the moment, right? So when we ask ourselves, like, what does self-awareness look like? We're asking ourselves, who are we, truly? I ask my clients this all the time. Who are you? Who's in front of me? Where did you come from? What do we have? We have to take some stock. We've got to take that inventory of all of the wonderful tools and gifts that we have already. We have to ask ourselves, what can we do? Right? A lot of the theory in higher ed or academics really talk about know thyself, know the audience, and know what skills you got so that you can give to your students. But many of us come with skills and we think to ourselves, gosh, can I really say that? Will it offend? And what I tell folks and share with folks is I usually live in the 9 times out of 10 rule, where 9 times out of 10, what I say may offend you or may be something that is of support. But my job is to drop it and land it and see and let go of control. When we think about self-management, right, what have I learned about the situation? In that exercise we did earlier, we have to learn and kind of take in the historical context of where we came from. Many of my clients talk about transgenerational trauma and oppression and racism, etc. The list goes on. And so it's important for us to acknowledge what has happened in the past. Right now, our country is really going through a race battle. And many folks are not paying attention to what has been going on for 416 plus years in this country. How do I hold myself accountable to my own bias? How is Joshua showing up? Am I showing up in a way that is open, honest, transparent, intentional? Am I providing good social awareness? What impact do systems play on us? Right? We have to see our community, the community beyond that, globally, our government. How do they interact with us, and how do we play out on it? We also have to ask ourselves, what is our role? And many of us, as we go into an election year, and I won't be political, don't worry, but I will just say vote. We have to ask ourselves, what is our role, right? What is our role in the big scheme of things, in this game, right? Maybe it's to sit back and be the silent worker. Maybe it's somebody who has voice and can use that on a platform to provide information out. And we have to ask ourselves, how have I made impact? And guess what, y'all? No matter what we do, whether we use voice or not, whether we act or decide not to, we are impacting regardless. And so we have to use that in a way that we want to and be very mindful of what that impact is. Many times we'll talk about intent versus consequence and things like that. And so really paying attention to what is my intention and how am I moving forward. Relationship management is the final one, right? How do I interact with all of those in my community? Am I saying hello, like I mentioned, to the students on my campus? How am I greeting them in the morning in my classroom? How am I seeing my clients? If I'm flustered and running late to a session, how am I showing up in a different way for those folks? What will I do differently to create space for those who do not have any? You all do that, and you all do that so beautifully. I'm not in your offices, and I bet you kill it. You knock it out of the park. And we have to really provide ourselves some grace now and say, you know, if I didn't quite provide the information as well as I could, I always have another opportunity. One of the things I think folks sometimes come in conflict with themselves is that when a conversation ends, it's done, it's over forever. And quite frankly, it's not. That's the beauty of a conversation.
Hey, Josh, if you're able to hear us, your connection froze up.
Hi, everyone. Sorry about that. I'm wondering if it was my internet again, but I think we got it. We're back up. But really talking about it in a way that is about negotiation. And most relationships, when clients come to me, couples, blended families, multi-partner families, etc., negotiation is really what folks are really having a hard time with. Right? They want to get their point across. They want to be heard. They want to use that voice that they know they have, but somewhere along the way, somebody has said, nope, don't say that. Don't do this, right? What are we doing? What we're doing is we're telling our right brain, don't dive in there because you've been told it's not good. And so we have to really pay attention to who we're telling that to and what impact it's making on individuals. And so I have a little call to action for y'all. Because today can't just be about, thank you, Josh, for providing us with wonderful information and joking and laughter, but we have to ask ourselves these three questions. And I think they're really key into movement of an institution. So if you're an upper management, middle management, or even what I like to call, right, on the front lines or in the roots, in the weeds, right? We have to ask ourselves, how am I perceived at my institution or in my institution, right? And I ask that one first because when we speak up, right, maybe we're that individual who is constantly answering questions, who is saying, actually, no, that's not the right theory. Here's what I heard, right? Or speaking up on behalf of others who are afraid to, right? How are you perceived by others? What is my institution doing to implement these ways of thinking? How is your institution implementing emotional intelligence? Have they purchased books for you? Are you reading it? Are there book clubs, etc.? One of the things I'm involved with at my college and institution is Leading with Love. And Leading with Love comes from a book around appreciation and the 5 languages of love. However, it's also the 5 languages of appreciation in the workplace. And when you implement those, right, they're just like words of affirmation, touch, etc. But if our business model can shift and change to that, much like emotional intelligence, we can start to see each other in a different light. Lastly, What will I do today to change the way that I work with those around me differently? Right? How will I show up differently? We have an amazing moment in time right now. And that moment is us to really reinvent ourselves and to acknowledge, yes, we're in this moment in time that is not changing in the foreseeable future. I hate to be the burden of bad news, but we can choose how we acknowledge we're going to show up today and to it, right? Choice is the biggest gift and the best gift we're ever given. And we have to decide how we're going to use it. That book is the 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. And so if we can keep that in mind and truly show up differently and allow our emotional side to come out, and some of you are probably saying to yourself, well, you know, we've got these people who are just tough and gritty and they'll never open up. Take that step back. Think about the time at the traffic light. Are you pausing? Are you thinking about how you can show up differently and how you can hear them differently and what you can say that might be different than what you have before? These people could be our coworkers. These people could be you and I. These people could be our folks, our clients that we're working with, right? And I know I'm using a lot of the them, theirs, and it's intentional because I choose not to use one gender over the other. And I think we have to be intentional with our word. And so the next time we show up, how will that look? And as I close today with you all, I love this quote. And as Michael and I were getting online, I said, oh, wait, I've got to add this in because I love, love, love what a 9in has to say. And they say, and the day came when the desire to remain the same was more painful than the risk to grow. And with that, y'all, thank you for sharing space. Thank you to the organizers. And I'm here for question and answer.